The Zathar, an advanced warship from the Xurian Empire, was one of the most powerful vessels in the galaxy. Known for its unmatched speed and firepower, it had earned the respect and fear of countless species across the cosmos. But now, drifting in the cold, dark void of space, it was nothing more than a hulking, lifeless wreck. Inside, the once proud crew of the ship scrambled desperately, trying to save their home, their lives, and their ship. The crisis had started innocently enough. A routine jump through hyperspace, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the ship tore through the fabric of space, something went terribly wrong. A massive shockwave from an uncharted anomaly slammed into the ship's hyperdrive engine, tearing it apart in an instant. The once smooth hum of the engine sputtered to a halt, replaced by an eerie silence. Captain Vex, the commanding officer of the Zathar, stood at the heart of the ship's control room, his eyes wide with disbelief. The diagnostic screen flickered with failure after failure, every system showing red. He turned to his chief engineer, Shara, who was staring at her own console in growing horror. "What's happening, Shara? Why aren't we moving?" Vex's voice was tight with concern. Shara didn't answer right away. Her fingers moved quickly over her controls, attempting to analyze the damage. But it was clear something was terribly wrong. "It's the hyperdrive, Captain. It's completely fried. The core is destabilizing." "It's irreparable," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit like a physical blow. Irreparable. The hyperdrive was the heart of their ship, the engine that powered them through the stars. And now it was gone. The crew of the Zathar was highly trained. They had faced countless dangers, fought fierce battles, and survived encounters with the galaxy's most dangerous species. But this was different. They were stranded in the middle of an uncharted sector, light years away from the nearest friendly port. The ship's communication systems were down, unable to send a distress signal. With no way to call for help, no way to even navigate out of this deadly situation, panic began to spread among the crew. Vex clenched his fists, trying to maintain his composure. "Stay calm, everyone. We are the Zathar. We've faced worse. We'll get through this." His words rang hollow, even to him. How could they get through this? They had no resources, no way to fix the hyperdrive, and no one to help. The galaxy was vast, and no one would come to their aid. As hours passed, the situation only grew worse. The once perfectly calibrated systems began to degrade. Life support was beginning to fail, and soon, oxygen levels would become critical. Vex watched helplessly as his crew scrambled to manage the systems they still had, but with each passing moment, it became clear that they were running out of time. The Zathar wasn't just damaged, it was dying. The warship that had once been the pride of the Xurian Empire, a symbol of their power and dominance, was now nothing more than a drifting corpse in the emptiness of space. The crew's morale began to crack. As the hours turned into days, they all knew the truth. Unless they could repair the hyperdrive, they would never make it out alive. And there was no one who could help them. No one but the humans. It was then that a small, unremarkable ship appeared on the edge of the Zathar sensors. At first, no one noticed. The ship was a mere blip on their damaged radar, easily overlooked in the midst of the growing chaos. But then, the blip grew larger and larger still, until it became undeniable. The humans had arrived. The ship was an old human freighter, a model that had been in service for years. It wasn't impressive, nor was it particularly fast or powerful. In fact, it looked out of place next to the Zathar, a juggernaut of a warship that had once ruled the stars. But what was it doing here? Vex's mind raced. Could these humans possibly have the technology to help them? Could anyone? The humans had been hired by an independent salvage company, contracted to inspect and salvage derelict ships across the galaxy. Their mission had been routine, nothing more than another job. But when they received the distress signal from the Zathar, they knew something was wrong. They had never expected to find a ship like this in such dire straits. The human crew, led by Jack Hensley, a brilliant mechanic known for his unconventional methods, had initially thought it was just another normal salvage job. But as they boarded the Zafar and saw the scale of the damage firsthand, they quickly realized how different this situation was. Jack, a man with a reputation for being able to fix almost anything, stood in front of the Zathar's main engine room, staring at the wreckage of the hyperdrive. His eyes scanned the broken systems, the shattered circuits, the warped metal. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Yet, as he examined it, something sparked in his mind. The technology here was far more advanced than anything on Earth, but it wasn't alien to him. It was mechanical, at its core, something Jack understood well. His fingers twitched with excitement, a familiar feeling of determination flooding him. "We can fix this," he muttered to himself. The humans had no idea how they were going to do it, but they had something the Xerians didn't: human ingenuity. Jack's team moved quickly, but even they could feel the pressure mounting. The Zathar's crew watched with a mixture of disbelief and growing curiosity as the humans worked. The Xerian engineers had already written off the possibility of repair, but Jack and his crew didn't give up. They tore apart systems, rewired circuits, and even made parts from scratch, using tools that were primitive compared to the technology on the Zafar, but effective nonetheless. And as the days went by, something remarkable began to happen. Slowly, piece by piece, the hyperdrive started to come back to life. But not everyone was convinced. Some of the Xerian officers still doubted the humans, believing that their methods were too rudimentary to be effective. "They're wasting time," one of them muttered. "We should have found another way." Yet Jack pressed on, his determination only growing stronger. He wasn't going to let this ship die, not on his watch. As the last piece fell into place and the hyperdrive began to hum once more, Vex couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. The Zafar was not beyond saving after all. And as the ship's systems slowly powered up, it was clear the humans had done the impossible. The crisis wasn't over yet, but for the first time in days, there was hope. Jack had done what everyone else thought was impossible. He had saved the Zafar, and in doing so, had earned the respect of a crew that had once looked down on him and his team as nothing more than a nuisance. As the engines roared to life, the Zafar began to move again, its lights flickering back on. It was ready to face whatever lay ahead. And for the first time, the crew of the Zafar realized something they had never known before. There was more to the humans than they had ever imagined. The Zafar had been stranded for over 3 days now, its crew growing weaker by the hour as their ship drifted aimlessly in the cold, silent expanse of space. Captain Vex stood at the bridge, his face drawn with exhaustion and frustration. The situation was beyond dire. The hyperdrive, the very core of their ship, had been irreparably damaged, and their communication system was useless, leaving them unable to reach anyone for help. Every attempt to fix the hyperdrive had failed, and as the life support systems began to dwindle, the crew found themselves fighting not just for their survival, but for hope itself. They were running out of time. Vex's mind raced. He had seen his crew face battles with deadly alien species, survive hostile environments, and defy the odds in countless ways. But this was different. This was a situation with no clear solution, no backup plan, and no way out. Desperation crept in. They had no allies out here in the uncharted sector of space. No one would come to their rescue. He turned to Shara, his chief engineer, who was hunched over a terminal, her hands trembling as she worked through yet another failed repair attempt. "Shara, I need something. Anything. We can't just sit here and wait to die." His voice was harsh, desperate. Shara didn't answer immediately. She could hear the panic in Vex's voice, and it mirrored what was in her own chest. She knew that if something didn't change soon, they were all doomed. The repairs had hit a wall, and no matter how many times they rechecked their systems, nothing seemed to help. They were trapped in space, and their only hope was the impossible. As the hours dragged on, the weight of the situation settled over everyone. But just when it seemed as though there was no way out, an unexpected blip appeared on the ship's radar. At first, no one noticed. The radar was damaged, and it had been unreliable for days. But then, the blip grew, moving closer. Someone in the control room called out, "Captain, there's a ship. It's coming toward us." Vex spun around, his pulse quickening. Could it be an enemy ship? Another threat to their already doomed mission? He narrowed his eyes, trying to focus on the screen. It was too small to be anything powerful. At first glance, it appeared like nothing more than a tiny speck against the vastness of space. But as the ship drew nearer, it grew clearer. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't a battleship. It wasn't anything like the Sapphire. Instead, it was a small freighter, old and battered, with no visible weapons or advanced systems. The kind of ship that, on any other day, would have been dismissed without a second thought. Yet now, it was the only thing between them and certain death. Vex's mind raced. What are the odds? He muttered under his breath. He had seen thousands of ships pass through his sector, and never once had one of them been in a position to help, least of all a freighter like this one. But there it was, heading straight for the Sapphire. "We don't have a choice," Vex said. "Prepare to board the freighter. We need answers, and we need them now." The decision was made quickly, almost on instinct. They had no way of knowing who or what was aboard the small freighter. It could be a trap, a trick set by enemies. But with their situation so dire, there was no time to hesitate. The crew scrambled into action, donning spacesuits and securing their weapons, just in case. The boarding party was ready. As the Zaphar's airlock opened, Vex led the crew down into the dark, quiet corridors of the freighter. The ship felt abandoned, lifeless, and the silence was unnerving. The only sound was the soft hum of the life support systems, still running but on minimal power. The freighter was small, its corridors narrow and cramped. It was a far cry from the grandeur of the Sapphire, and the smell of old metal and stale air hung heavily in the atmosphere. Yet there was something about the ship that felt different. Something about it felt oddly familiar. Vex's pulse quickened. Something was wrong. The ship's interior was too quiet. No signs of life. The boarding party moved cautiously, weapons drawn, every shadow a potential threat. They moved from room to room, calling out for any signs of the crew. But there was no one. No crew. No life. It was as if the ship had been abandoned for years. But that didn't make sense. The freighter had just arrived. There was no sign of damage to the hull. No sign of any battle or struggle. It was intact, but eerily empty. Then, as they reached the engine room, they found something that stopped them dead in their tracks. A group of humans. Mechanics, it seemed, dirty, exhausted but alive. They were gathered around a set of tools, working quickly but efficiently. Their leader, a man with sharp eyes and an air of quiet confidence, turned as they entered. "You must be the Sapphire," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We've been expecting you." Vex's mind spun. Expecting them? How? How could anyone possibly know where they were or what had happened? The man, his face weathered by years of hard work, took a step forward. "We've been monitoring the situation for a while now," he said. "You're not the first ship to find yourself in this predicament. We've dealt with worse." The words seemed impossible. This freighter crew, these humans, how could they have known what was happening to the Sapphire? The idea of humans being involved in a situation like this was laughable to many in the galaxy. The Xerians were technologically superior, light years ahead in nearly every field. But here they were, standing face to face with these humans who seemed oddly confident. "You can help us." Vex's voice was laced with doubt, but there was no mistaking the glimmer of hope in his eyes. The man nodded. "Yes, we can fix your hyperdrive. You're not as far gone as you think." For a moment, the room was silent. The humans, repairing the Sapphire. Vex couldn't believe it. But then he saw the tools in their hands, the focused determination in their eyes. This wasn't a joke. They weren't bluffing. The freighter crew had experience. They had knowledge. Knowledge that no one else had, not even the Jurians. How? Vex asked, his voice barely a whisper. The leader of the human crew, Jack Hensley, smiled slightly. Leave it to us. You're not alone anymore. As the humans began to explain their methods and the seemingly impossible plans to repair the Zathar's hyperdrive, Vex couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. The arrival of these humans, so unexpected, so improbable, was the only chance they had left. It was a glimmer of hope in a time when all seemed lost, and with that, the Zathar's fate rested not with its technologically advanced crew, but with a group of humans who had dared to do the impossible. The Zathar drifted in the cold vacuum of space, a massive warship with its systems on the brink of collapse. The crew, once confident in their technological superiority, had been reduced to mere survivors clinging to hope. The hyperdrive, essential for their escape and survival, had failed beyond repair. No amount of effort from their skilled engineers could fix it. Every attempt to restore power, every system reboot, ended in failure. The crew's morale was at an all-time low. Captain Vex, standing at the bridge with his hands clasped tightly behind his back, stared at the endless stars outside, his mind racing for an answer that didn't seem to exist. He knew his people, strong, brilliant, and always ready for any challenge. But this was different. The Zathar was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no way to communicate, no way to reach help, and a rapidly failing life support system. They had only hours left before it became impossible to survive. The situation was desperate, and Captain Vex knew it. "We've tried everything," Shara, the ship's lead engineer, said, her voice filled with frustration as she looked up from the terminal. "I don't know what else to do. We need help, and we need it now." But the help they needed wasn't coming. No allies, no rescue fleet. They were alone. Their only hope was a solution, one that had to come from within. The humans, who had arrived unexpectedly with their freighter, had offered help, but the problem was vast, and their knowledge of advanced Jurian technology was limited. The question was, could they really help? Captain Vex turned to Jack Hensley, the leader of the human crew, who had been quiet for some time. Jack had a calm demeanor, but his eyes revealed the weight of the situation. "Do you have a plan?" Vex asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he feared speaking the words aloud might somehow make their hopeless situation more real. Jack hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, his boots echoing in the silent room. "Maybe," he said, "but it won't be easy." Vex narrowed his eyes. "You have something in mind." "We've been looking over your systems," Jack continued, glancing back at his crew. "It's not going to be a traditional fix. The problem is that your hyperdrive is far too advanced for standard repairs, but there's another way we can do this. We need to bypass the entire system and manually jumpstart the core." Vex's brow furrowed in confusion. Bypass the entire system. How? Jack smiled, but there was no humor in it. "With ingenuity. Your hyperdrive is a machine, just like any other. It has fail-safes, and we can exploit those." He paused. "We just need to rewire a few systems, cut a few corners, and create a temporary but functional workaround." Vex's heart skipped a beat. He was desperate, but it sounded too good to be true. "How long would that take?" he asked. "If we work fast, we can have it running in a few hours," Jack replied. "But we'll need to work together, every person on this ship, human and Jurian. It won't work otherwise." It was a risky plan, one that required both trust and an almost reckless abandon of their usual procedures. But they had no other choice. Captain Vex made his decision. "Then let's do it," he ordered, his voice steely with determination. The crew mobilized quickly. Jack and his human crew began explaining the basic steps of the plan, with each Jurian crew member taking on a specific task. Shara, Ever the brilliant engineer was skeptical at first, but she didn't question Jack's approach. Time was running out, and they couldn't afford to waste it. They worked in a frenzy, wiring cables, connecting power lines, and reconfiguring energy channels. The air on the Zephyr was thick with tension as the crew scrambled to follow the instructions, hoping that this would work. As the hours passed, the tension only grew. The ship's interior, normally a place of calm and order, now felt like a ticking time bomb. The hum of the engines was replaced by the loud, rhythmic clatter of tools and the constant whir of the machines. Shara's fingers were raw from the effort, and Vex could see the strain in her eyes as she checked and rechecked the wires, making sure that everything was properly connected. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to the clean, safe solution they had hoped for, but it was the only option they had left. "Everything is connected," Shara finally announced, her voice tight with both relief and uncertainty. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Jack nodded. "Now comes the hard part. We have to manually jump the core without setting off the failsafes." He turned to Vex. "The idea is simple. We overload the power supply in a controlled manner, forcing the core to reboot itself." Vex stared at him, unsure whether to feel hopeful or terrified, but there was no time for fear. "Do it," he said, his voice sharp. The human crew moved into position, fingers hovering over control panels, ready to push the buttons that could either save them or send them into an irreversible descent. The tension in the air was suffocating. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of breathing and the soft tapping of fingers on the consoles. And then the room fell silent. They were ready. Jack gave the signal, and Shara hit the final button. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The crew held their breath, waiting for some sign that they had succeeded. But then, a low rumble shook the Zephyr, followed by a bright flash of light. The systems flickered, and the lights dimmed. Panic shot through the crew. Had they failed? Had they just made things worse? But then, the hyperdrive came to life. Slowly at first, the energy readings climbed, stabilizing as the core began to hum. A deep, powerful vibration filled the room, and Captain Vex's eyes widened. "It's working," he whispered, a sense of disbelief washing over him. The hyperdrive, the very system that had been dead, was alive again. Against all odds, they had done it. But there was no time to celebrate. The crew worked quickly to stabilize the power, making sure the hyperdrive didn't go unstable again. The Zephyr was no longer dead in the water. It was alive, and it was ready to move. Captain Vex couldn't believe it. The humans had done the impossible. They had saved them. As the Zephyr powered up, Jack turned to Vex, a quiet pride in his eyes. "We're not out of here yet, but we've got a chance. That's more than you had before." Vex gave a nod, his face breaking into a rare smile. "A chance is all we need." The Zephyr was ready to leave the dead zone. The impossible crisis had been solved, not by superior technology or firepower, but by a group of humans who had dared to think outside the box. And for the first time in days, hope began to shine in the hearts of the Zephyr crew. The journey was far from over, but now they had the one thing they hadn't had in a long time: a chance to survive. The vast expanse of space stretched out before them like an endless sea, its black depths filled with the hum of distant stars. The Tyron, a massive battlecruiser, had been orbiting the desolate planet for hours, and the tension among its crew was palpable. Captain Darius stood at the command deck, his eyes fixed on the screen, watching the slowly approaching fleet. It was a hostile fleet, their weapons powered and ready, their intentions clear. The peace that had existed in this sector of space had long been shattered. War was inevitable, and the threat of destruction loomed large. Darius had led his people through countless battles. But this felt different. The enemy wasn't just a group of mercenaries or an unknown faction. They were the Zeraxians, an empire known for their ruthlessness and overwhelming firepower. If they attacked, the Tyron and its crew wouldn't stand a chance. The survival of his people hung on a thread, and Darius knew it. The silence in the command deck was deafening, broken only by the soft clicks of buttons as his officers worked feverishly to calculate their options. His first officer, Lieutenant Area, stood beside him, her face grim. "Captain, we've been in communication with the other ships in our fleet. Everyone is preparing for battle, but we're outnumbered. The Zeraxians are too powerful. We need a plan." Darius didn't answer immediately. He stared at the enemy ships, their silhouettes growing larger by the minute. His mind raced, but every strategy he considered led to one inescapable conclusion: defeat. That Tyron wasn't built for this kind of conflict. They were strong, yes, but not enough to face an empire like the Zeraxians. He could feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. Failure meant the end of his people, and there were no second chances. "We can't win this battle alone," Darius said finally, breaking the silence. "We need allies." Arya turned to him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Allies? Who would help us now? We've made enemies all across the galaxy. We're on our own." Darius knew that Arya was right. Their reputation had preceded them, and the decisions they had made in the past had left them isolated. But something had changed in the galaxy. The Zeraxians' rise to power had begun to stir old alliances and long-forgotten grudges. There were factions out there who hated the Zeraxians just as much as they did, and now was the time to reach out to them. "We have to try," Darius said, his voice firm. "We'll send out a message, a last-ditch call for help. It's the only shot we have." The crew worked quickly to send the distress signal, broadcasting it to anyone who might be listening. It was a risky move. If the message fell into the wrong hands, it could mean their destruction. But they had no other choice. As the signal was sent, Darius couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, but it was faint. He wasn't sure anyone would come. The galaxy was a vast and uncertain place, and trust was a rare commodity. Hours passed, and Darius watched the approaching enemy fleet. Every moment felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, a small fleet of ships appeared on the far edge of the system. They weren't the Zeraxians, but they weren't exactly allies either. The ships were sleek and unknown, their markings unfamiliar. Darius felt a surge of anxiety in his chest. Who were they? Could they be trusted? As the ships approached, a transmission came through. It was a voice, calm but with an edge of uncertainty. "Captain Darius, we've received your distress signal. We're here to assist." Darius listened closely, his pulse quickening. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but his mind racing. The response came with a surprising honesty. "We are the Tefar, a faction with a score to settle with the Zeraxians. We've heard of your battles, and we've been waiting for an opportunity like this. We're offering our support." Darius felt a mix of relief and caution. The Tefar were a mercenary group, known for their skills in warfare, but also for their unpredictability. Could they be trusted? Would they betray them when the time came? But he had no choice. The Tefar were their only hope. "Thank you," Darius said, his voice laced with both gratitude and wariness. "We accept your help." The transmission ended, and the Tefar ships moved into formation with the Chiron. The alliance was formed, but Darius knew it wasn't secure. He would need to keep his guard up. The Tefar were not to be underestimated, and their true intentions remained unclear. The next few hours were filled with frantic preparations. The Tefar ships integrated seamlessly with the Chiron, their crews working together to ready their weapons and fortify their defenses. Darius could see the anxiety in his crew's eyes, but there was also a spark of determination. The fight was coming, and they had no choice but to face it head-on. As the enemy fleet drew closer, Darius addressed his crew. "This is it. The Zeraxians won't show mercy. We fight for survival. We fight for the future of our people, but we do not fight alone. We have allies now, and together we stand a chance." The crew erupted into a chorus of agreement, their voices loud and resolute. The tension that had weighed on them for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in hours, Darius felt a glimmer of hope. Then the battle began. The Xerexian fleet opened fire first, their weapons tearing through the darkness, ripping apart anything in their path. The Xiron and the Tefar ships fought back with everything they had. Explosions lit up the sky, and the sound of laser fire echoed through the hull of the Xiron. It was chaos. The Xerexians had the upper hand in firepower, but the combined forces of the Xiron and the Tefar fought with ferocity and determination. They moved as one, each ship supporting the other in a way that Darius had never seen before. It was clear that they were more than just allies. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. In the midst of the battle, Darius noticed a shift in the tides. The Tefar ships were taking the brunt of the Xerexian attack, drawing their fire while the Xiron and the remaining ships concentrated on strategic strikes. The Tefar were sacrificing themselves, but it was working. The Xerexian fleet was beginning to show signs of strain. Darius knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Tefar were strong, but they couldn't endure the assault much longer. The key to victory lay in one decisive strike, a move that would disable the Xerexian flagship and cripple their command. The plan was risky, but Darius had no other choice. The fate of both fleets rested on this one moment. With a surge of determination, Darius gave the order. Strike now. Take out their flagship. The combined forces of the Xiron and the Tefar launched a final, coordinated assault. It was a gamble, but as the flagship's shields cracked and its systems began to fail, Darius knew they had won. The Xerexian fleet, now without its leader, began to retreat. The Tefar and the Xiron had achieved the impossible. They had survived. As the debris of the battle floated in space, Darius stood at the command deck, his eyes on the stars. They had formed an unlikely alliance, one forged in desperation, but it had been enough. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Allies had come when they were needed most, and together, they had risen above the odds. The night sky above the barren planet of Illyris was like a dark veil, stretching endlessly with no stars to light the way. Below the Astra, a massive warship drifted silently in the void. Its crew was tense, every member focused on their task as the ship hovered over the planet's surface. Inside the command deck, Captain Leon Hawk stood, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the bleak landscape. The mission had been simple at first: assist a small outpost under attack by Covarians, a ruthless warlord faction known for their brutality and savagery. But what was supposed to be a simple rescue had escalated into a full-scale battle, one that had now brought them to the edge of defeat. The Astra had already suffered significant damage. The Covarians had been more prepared than they had anticipated. They had sent a fleet, one far larger than anyone could have predicted. Even with the support of a few allied ships, the odds were against them. The crew of the Astra was experienced, but they were still outnumbered, and their weapons were no match for the overwhelming firepower of the Covarians. The ship's shields were failing, and the engines were beginning to overheat. There was little time left. Captain Hawk knew that if they didn't act soon, they would be destroyed. The communications officer, Lieutenant Sarah Quinn, spoke up, her voice tight with fear. "Captain, the Covarian flagship is locking onto our position. We don't have much time left. If we don't pull back now, we'll be gone." Hawk turned slowly, his expression grim. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His mind raced, searching for a solution, any plan that could turn the tide of battle. The Astra wasn't the most advanced ship in the fleet, but it was strong. Its crew was loyal, and they were willing to fight to the last. But loyalty and bravery weren't enough against such overwhelming force. They needed a miracle. "Sarah," Hawk said quietly, "is there any chance we can get a distress signal out to the Allies? Maybe we can get reinforcements. It's our only shot." She hesitated before answering. "I can try, Captain, but with the Covarians blocking our signal, it won't be easy. I don't know if it will reach anyone." There was a long pause as Hawk considered their options. The chances of reinforcements arriving in time were slim, but what choice did they have? They couldn't retreat, not with the outpost still in danger. A part of him wanted to pull back and save his crew, but another part refused to abandon those who needed help. He made his decision. "Send the signal. We'll fight to the end." As Quinn worked to send out the distress signal, Hawk looked around the room. His crew was preparing for the worst, but they weren't afraid. They knew what had to be done. The Covarians were ruthless, but they didn't know what the crew of the Astra was capable of. There was one thing they could count on. When it came to a fight for survival, humans had an uncanny ability to adapt and outsmart their enemies, and that, Hawk knew, was the only chance they had. The tension on the ship was palpable. Every second felt like an eternity as they waited for the signal to go out. Then, just as hope seemed to dwindle, an unexpected message came through. It was faint, garbled, but unmistakable. "Captain Hawk." The voice crackled over the intercom. "This is Admiral Jarek of the Celestis. We received your distress signal. We're en route. Hold tight." Hawk's heart skipped a beat. Reinforcements were coming. The Celestis was one of the most powerful ships in the fleet, and with its support, they had a fighting chance. But there was no time to waste. The Covarians were already closing in, their weapons aimed directly at the Astra. Hawk's mind raced as he quickly issued orders. "All hands, brace for impact. Prepare to fight to the death." The Astra shook violently as the first barrage of Covarian fire struck its shields. Sparks flew from the walls, and the lights flickered. But the ship held together, its crew moving with precision, reacting like a well-oiled machine. Hawk could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he moved to his command seat, his eyes fixed on the battle unfolding outside. The Celestis was still several minutes away, but every moment felt like a lifetime. Then, just when it seemed like they couldn't hold on any longer, something incredible happened. The Celestis appeared from the darkness, its massive cannons blazing as it tore into the Covarian fleet. The battle shifted in an instant. The Covarians, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of a far stronger force, hesitated. That brief moment of uncertainty was all the Astra and its crew needed. "We've got this," shouted Hawk. He grabbed the communications headset and issued his orders. "All ships, target the enemy flagship. We'll take them down together." The crew of the Astra was quick to respond. With the Celestis providing the firepower, they focused all their efforts on the Covarian flagship. The space around them was filled with explosions and flashing lights as both sides fought for control. Hawk could feel the ship shudder as enemy fire continued to rain down, but he remained calm. The crew was with him. Together, they would overcome the impossible. The Astra's weapons came to life, launching a series of well-aimed strikes at the Covarian flagship. The enemy ship's shields flared brightly before collapsing under the pressure. The Covarians tried to retaliate, but it was too late. The Celestis delivered a final devastating blow, sending the flagship into a fiery explosion that lit up the darkness of space. For a moment, there was silence. The Covarians had been defeated, their fleet broken and scattered. The remaining enemy ships quickly began to retreat, leaving behind the wreckage of their once proud flagship. The battle was over. Hawk allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The Astra had survived, and the outpost had been saved. The crew of the Celestis had arrived just in time, but it wasn't just their firepower that had won the day. It was the determination and quick thinking of his crew that had made all the difference. They had faced an impossible situation, and against all odds, they had triumphed. As the remaining enemy ships flooded into the distance, Hawk looked out at the stars, his heart still pounding in his chest. He had been prepared for the worst, but what had happened was something he hadn't expected. The crew of the Astra had done what no one thought possible. They had fought and won against overwhelming odds. In the end, it was their courage, their unity, and their unwavering belief in each other that had led to their unexpected triumph. The Astra had become a symbol of hope, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And as the ship made its way back to friendly space, Hawk couldn't help but feel proud. Against all odds, they had won. They had faced the impossible, and they had triumphed.